What's good, y'all? It's your boy HBK Tris.
And Gigi.
You already know what it is, man. History buff, stand up. Last video we did was World War II Part 1. Y'all been going crazy in the comments. They're like, when is Part 2? When are you dropping Part 2? I've been reading all the comments, man. Y'all know y'all history, man. I'm learning some stuff in the comments. We learned some stuff in this video, too. And y'all got way more suggestions for us as well. Historic stuff that happened. So I'm like, hey, man, we're down to learn on the channel.
Yeah.
We're definitely down.
It's fun.
So let's just get into Part 2. Like, comment, subscribe. Let's go.
This video was made possible by Skillshare, an online learning community. Stick around until the end of the video to learn how you can get an exclusive deal just for OverSimplified viewers.
Yeah, got to get in. Part 2, let's get it.
So what else is happening? Well, when I said Britain was all alone, that wasn't entirely true. Many Commonwealth nations and other allied colonies had joined the war in Britain's support. They would play a key role throughout the war, particularly in the African and Italian campaigns. On the Axis side, Germany, Italy, and Japan signed the Defensive Tripartite Pact, bringing their military alliance even closer together. The Soviet Union's war against Finland should have been an easy victory, but it became a humiliating struggle, and their military ineptitude was put on full display. In the end, they did force the Finns to sue for peace. Then, they continued their honorable campaign of pushing around much smaller countries by annexing the Baltic states and part of northern Romania. France's colonies in equatorial Africa were like, heck no, we aren't going to join the Germans, and they all pledged their allegiance to free France, except for Gabon, which had to be taken by military force. The Allies also tried to capture the strategic port of Dakar, but that ended in failure. Mussolini had seen Hitler's successes, and he thought now it was Italy's time to shine, so he tried to take British Somaliland, and that went pretty well. Then he tried to take Egypt, and that went less well. Then he tried to take Greece, and that went really badly. Churchill began referring to Italy as Europe's soft underbelly. He began favoring a military campaign from the south and started sending British troops to Greece. All of this had Hitler pretty concerned, and he moved to protect his southern flank. He had been getting friendly with Hungary and twisted their arm into signing the Tripartite Pact and joining the Axis powers. Romania was also eager to join for protection against the Soviet Union.
I know he was taking everybody, forcing people to join his team, like, by force. Damn.
And why? They were afraid of him?
I guess so. I guess his army was probably elite. Maybe he was like, he just had so much stuff.
The Tripartite Pact was designed to prevent any other countries from deciding to join the Allies, specifically Britain's old ally, the pesky United States of America. When war first broke out, American public opinion was strongly against joining in. In 1940, there was an election. The Republican candidate said, I will not send any young Americans to die in Europe. And sitting President Franklin D. Roosevelt said, I will also not send any young Americans to die in Europe, unless I have to. And I might. And Roosevelt won. Churchill asked him to join the war, but Roosevelt said, no can do, Winston, but you know what? Here, have some weapons. America began supplying the Allies with food and munitions, but there was one problem. German U-boats were sinking thousands of Allied supply ships in the Atlantic, including American ones. If the Germans could sever Britain's supply line, the UK would starve. Throughout the war, the Allies had to come up with better technology to fight the U-boats. Improved radar, aircraft with longer range, better weaponry and convoy tactics.
Or do we like advance in technology? Because they be, when the tough get going, they start just sticking
gotta find ways to
get it over there.
Yeah.
They're like, you know what, let's just put this thing on a plane. Yeah. Crazy.
At one point, a man even called a meeting and said, Pykrete. You take some wood, you take some ice, you put them together, you get Pykrete. And then he pulled out a gun and shot some wood and it shattered. And then he shot some Pykrete and the bullet ricocheted off it and hit someone else in the conference room. Then they tried to make a Pykrete aircraft carrier, but that idea was scrapped because that's a really dumb idea. In the end, Alan Turing and his team of codebreakers cracked Germany's Enigma code, and the U-boats gradually became less and less of a threat. Back in Africa, Britain decided to push Italy out of Egypt. Hey, that was pretty easy, so they kept going. Hitler realized he was going to have to finally step in and do something. He went to Bulgaria and Yugoslavia and said, hey, I'm going to move troops through you to get to Greece, so either join us or, you know, be invaded. Bulgaria opted to join them. Yugoslavia opted to be invaded. Then Greece finally fell to the joint German-Italian invasion. The British had moved troops from North Africa to fight in Greece, which helped Rommel and his tank divisions push the British back to Egypt. And they could have kept going, but a small, mostly Australian force held out under siege for 8 months into war, denying the Germans a strategic port city and disrupting their supply line. Despite having some success in the Middle East, the British didn't seem like...
Shout out to Troll Book, man. Y'all did your thing, man.
I mean, 8 months is a long time.
8 months is a long time. They were serious.
Yeah.
They didn't give up.
And it's small but mighty.
Small but mighty. You know what I'm saying? Let's get it.
Any real threat for now. Hey, Soviet Union, look out.
Dang.
With 3 million troops, Hitler launched the largest ground invasion in history, and Stalin was far from ready. Both Churchill and Roosevelt had warned him of an impending attack, but he dug his head in the sand, and the Soviets didn't stand a chance. Germany made staggering progress, with huge encircling movements capturing mind-boggling numbers of Russian troops. A quarter million at Bialystok, Minsk, 300,000 at Smolensk, nearly 700,000 at Kiev, and again at Vyazma and Bryansk. Leningrad was put under a siege that would last an insufferable 4 years. The invasion of Russia had been Hitler's main ideological goal from the beginning, and his hatred for the ethnic peoples there was now unleashed in all its fury. The Eastern Front of the Second World War was brutal for all that endured it. The Germans were now inside of Moscow, and that's it. It's all over. But then it happened. It got cold. Stupid cold. Hitler had hoped the Soviets would give up before winter, but they kept fighting. His commanders came to him and said, "Can we please dig in for the winter and wait until spring?" "No, keep going."
Said,
"But oil is literally freezing inside our vehicles." "That's fine, keep going." "We're having to leave the corpses of our frozen horses by the side of the road so we can
Then
still
do
find a
it.
way in the snowdrift."
Facts. He does not
Perfectly
care.
normal. Keep going. Hitler hadn't given his millions of men winter clothing and supplies because he thought he really should have won by now. Then, Stalin called in troops from the Siberian front, specially trained to fight in the extreme cold, and the Germans were no match. They were now
they
being
pushed
pushed
them
back.
back.
They had no choice but to
Sheesh.
dig in and wait for winter to end. Germany's victories were staggering, and Japan was eager not to miss the victory bus. Their war in China had come to a standstill, but they wanted to keep expanding their sphere of influence and getting those sweet, sweet raw materials. They began making plans to expand southward, but there was a problem. Southeast Asia was heavily colonized by America and Great Britain. It was also full of ocean. Ocean meant naval combat, and there was no way the
So I
Japanese
couldn't
Navy
take
could
it.
stand up to
couldn't
the
do that.
US and the UK. So they thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could destroy their navies
Oh,
before we
snap.
begin
We
our
know where
conquest?
this is going.
And so it
Oh.
was. On December
Yeah.
7th, 1941, the Japanese launched a surprise air raid on the US
Yeah.
Pacific
Yeah.
Fleet at Pearl Harbor and inflicted a huge amount of damage. They also attacked British colonies in Southeast Asia. Roosevelt had no choice but to declare war on Japan, and so did Churchill. Hitler then declared war on America, even though he
Dang.
totally didn't have to. The attack on
He
Pearl
just
Harbor
wanted
seemed
to.
like a big Japanese.
He just wanted
Yeah,
to.
he's just like, all right, it's time.
Yeah, if we're calling people out, I'm calling you guys
Yeah, and if
out.
America's joining, then
Jeez.
be ready.
Okay, it's getting real.
Victory, but they didn't attack any of the naval repair yards, fuel storage tanks, or the submarine base, meaning the Pacific Fleet would be up and running again pretty
Not
soon.
very
In the
smart.
meantime, though,
Wow.
the Japanese were able to begin their conquest. They took Guam, the Gilbert Islands, Wake Island, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. They
Dang.
forced Thailand to join them so they could march their troops through to
What?
Malaya. They swept through Singapore, North
I never
Borneo,
would've
the East
expected
Indies,
that.
New Guinea,
Yeah.
the Solomons, and they were now threatening
Japan was
northern
not playing
Australia
around.
and the borders of India. Japan's victory had been as staggering as the
Sheesh.
Germans, and it reinforced the Japanese idea that this was a divine war which they were destined to win. But their victories had been based on speed, not power, and power would eventually catch up with them.
Yeah.
For now, though, in all occupied nations, the people suffered. Persecution, forced labor, harsh punishments for any who
Man.
spoke out
It's a lot
against
of
their
the world.
occupiers.
That
In
is
Europe, the
a big
Nazis were
gap.
rounding up ethnic minorities and other unwanted groups and individuals. In particular, millions of Jewish people would suffer through the terrible events
yeah.
of the Holocaust. Brave resistance movements rose up in defiance of their invaders, while the people held out for hope. And hope was coming. Winter was over, and Hitler could continue his push eastward. But this time, he switched up his strategy. He wanted to focus on the south. His plan was to cut off the Russian armies in the Caucasus, an area full of oil, and then invade the Caucasus and take all the oil. His forces moved across the north with ease, and Hitler got cocky. He rerouted the 4th Panzer Army south early, leaving the 6th Army to complete the encircling movement alone. To do so,
Okay.
the 6th Army had to reach and take the key Soviet city of Stalingrad. The Russians defended it fiercely,
Okay, the
and
Russians were doing their
Stalingrad saw
thing.
some of the harshest fighting of the entire war. The Soviets held up the German advance for 5
Oh
months
my
as they battled in the
gosh.
war.
That's what I'm saying. This part they don't, leaving out like they was really destroying some cities and towns and
That's
golly,
crazy.
sheesh.
That looks like a deserted place.
Exactly.
And then the buildings just turned into ruins. Like they disintegrated.
That's
But
crazy.
people did that.
People was destroying stuff. That's crazy.
City, which bought them valuable time. When the Germans had first launched their invasion a year earlier, the Soviets had moved their factories to the east. Those
Okay.
factories had been building a butt-ton of tanks and aircraft and getting the Soviet army up to scratch. Now, it was ready. Stalin gathered his new and improved forces around the city, and in an
Dang.
attack that resembled Hitler's own encirclement tactics, they began surrounding the 6th Army.
Okay, just circle.
Hitler's commanders came to him and said, "Hey, maybe we should retreat." But Hitler said,
He's
"No,
probably
no,
like, no.
you
I
stay."
don't hear none of that.
The entire 6th Army was
These little
trapped and had to
I know.
surrender. With complete air superiority, the Soviets started pushing westward. For Stalin, it was a resounding victory. For Hitler, an absolute catastrophe. Things also weren't looking too good for Hitler elsewhere. With America now in the war, Allied bombing over German cities reached devastating levels. In
Yeah.
Africa, the British had pushed Rommel back again, Then they were pushed back again, and finally, after a decisive battle at El Alamein, and with American and British troops arriving in the west, the Germans and Italians were squeezed out of Africa. Japan was also already seeing its rapid success being turned around. They attempted to take the island of Midway, but the US Navy was ready for the attack, and they sank Japan's carrier. Actually, they sank a lot of it. It was a battle from which the Japanese Navy would never recover. British, Indian...
Maybe that's where the game Battleship does come from. Dang, I never thought about that.
Kind of
interesting.
Gloomy.
Yeah, that is kind of gloomy. Jeez, this is getting real though. Now that like all the countries are involved, like literally world war, like the whole world. Everybody's beefing. This is crazy.
Chinese troops held the line in the harsh jungle terrain of Burma, and the Japanese suffered losses in the Solomon Islands and New Guinea. They began to realize they were not invincible.
So
with the Axis out of Africa, the Allies had to decide their next move. Churchill still wanted to attack from the south, while the Americans preferred a full sea invasion in northern France. All right, said the Americans, we'll do it your way. Allied forces successfully landed in Sicily and began moving north. They also carried out bombing raids over Rome. The thing was, many of the people in Sicily had relatives living in America, and they greeted the American troops quite warmly. With the war reaching home territory, most Italians just weren't that into it, and Mussolini was suddenly very unpopular. He was voted out by his own fascist Grand Council and was toppled from power.
That man stayed getting thrown out of something, man. If you watch part one, you gotta watch part one of our first reaction, man.
Yeah, he did get thrown out.
He went from a teacher to angry dude and
jail, right?
Yeah, and then they loved him, and now they hate him. They're like, bro, we don't want a war. We don't want to fight. And he's like, no. And they end up kicking him out. That's crazy. He stayed getting kicked out.
Italy immediately began negotiations for surrender. Hitler wasn't surprised and had already sent reinforcements south. In an operation he ironically called Operation Axis, German troops quickly disarmed Italian troops in the north. The Allies continued fighting the Germans up through Italy, but then winter set in, meaning mud, and everything slowed to a halt. All right, said the Americans, let's do it our way as well. Germany had made itself a lot of enemies, and millions of Allied troops had been gathering in England as factories worked around the clock producing the war material needed for a super crazy massive, the likes of which the world has never seen before, invasion of Europe. The Germans knew an Allied invasion would come, but they didn't know where it would land. Thanks to Allied deception tactics, they thought there was a pretty good chance it would come at Calais, but the Allies were really going to land in Normandy because it was less fortified and the beaches were nicer. Under the careful planning of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the invasion that had been long in the making was just about ready to go. Just one thing was preventing the launch: the British weather. For a short while, everyone sat around waiting for a decent day, and then
I'm learning this, like, man, weather does play a big part. I didn't realize how much weather does play a big part in all this, you know.
You have to use anything to your advantage.
Yeah, if it's snowing, it's not good, you know, for some teams, with some armies. Weather does play a part.
On the night of June 5th, over 1,000 bombers took off and raided coastline defenses, while paratroopers were dropped inland in a bit of a chaotic operation, tasked with sabotaging defenses and capturing key bridges to stop any German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. Early the next morning, the barrage came, as Allied ships fired a huge number of shells at the German fortifications, and then the landings. The Americans at Utah and Omaha, the British at Golden Sword, and the Canadians at Juneau. It was a tremendous struggle with a great loss of life, particularly at Omaha, but the Allied troops captured the beaches, and the landings were a success. Then they began their movements inland. They took the port of Cherbourg and the city of Caen. The Americans moved south to capture Brittany. Then, in a massive disaster for the Germans, British and Canadian troops from the north and Americans from the south trapped the German 7th Army in a near wipeout encircling movement. In August, Allied troops landed in the south of France to little resistance. On one beach, all they found was a Frenchman.
You play Call of Duty, man.
This
is like domination, man. If you played the game mode domination, now I'm like, dang, this is like, they actually, it's not a game. Like, they do that in real life domination. Like in Call of Duty, it's like, you're with a squad and you just keep moving and taking over, and the more you move, the more you're winning. But I'm like, this is actually what they're doing. Like, they
it's probably like it's inspiration.
Yeah, it's literally from real war stuff. Like, that's crazy.
Handing out champagne. Paris was liberated, and the Germans were pushed out of France as the Allies entered Belgium. In the Far East, the Allies started to push the Japanese out of Burma, as the Americans launched a two-pronged offensive in the Pacific. In the south, General MacArthur led the push to liberate the Philippines, while General Nimitz oversaw the brutal island-hopping campaign. American forces had to make hard-fought landing after hard-fought landing on fiercely defended small islands as they moved steadily towards the Japanese mainland. The Japanese believed that the greatest thing a person could do was to die in battle, and the most dishonorable act was to surrender. As a result, they fought ferociously to the very end. And the closer the Americans got to the mainland, the more ferocious the resistance became. In February 1945, the Americans captured the island of Iwo Jima, and an intense firebombing campaign of Japan's wooden cities began. The Allies suffered some setbacks trying to liberate the Netherlands, but they were making progress and were now threatening the industrial heartland of Germany. Hitler's health, both mentally and physically, was rapidly deteriorating. Things were looking bad, and he was desperate. He said, "We need to turn this thing around, and I have just the trick." Remember a few years back when we blitzkrieged through the Ardennes and trapped the Allied forces in Belgium? Well, I'm going to do the exact same thing. Again.
Okay.
He gathered his forces and tried to pound them through the Ardennes. He used up
Bring
the
all of them
remainder
to
of
the
Germany's
front.
strength and resources, and he managed to create quite a nice bulge. He also trapped some American forces in the Belgian town of Bastogne. The
Dang,
Germans sent the
screwed.
trapped Americans a message saying surrender or be annihilated. When it was read out to the commanding officer, he said, "They want to surrender? No, sir, they want us to surrender." Nuts! And that's what they sent off as their official reply. General Patton's Third Army then managed to break the siege from the southwest,
they're not
and the
playing
Germans
around.
were pushed back. Hitler's last-ditch attempt had failed, and what followed was a total collapse of the German forces. The Allies pushed
Yeah,
into Germany
squeeze
from
them
both
in.
sides. The Soviet Union took Warsaw and kept pushing to Berlin. In his bunker, Hitler realized all hope was lost. Berlin fell, and with it, Hitler's dreams of a great German empire. Two of the Axis nations had been knocked out. One to go. The Americans began their assault
Just
on
like
Okinawa,
that?
the
I know,
last island
wow.
before they would reach the Japanese mainland.
Oh, God,
The desperate
we know what's
Japanese fought
happening.
hard, launching kamikaze attacks on the U.S. ships. The citizens of Okinawa suffered through the terrible fighting, but in 2 months,
Okay, y'all said we didn't know history. All right, I know what's happening next.
I remember that.
I know the fall of the Berlin Wall and all that. That's when, like, Germany finally lost, but I don't know.
the island was captured.
We
The
gotta
Allies
know
now
what's about
had to
to
make a
happen
choice. Either continue the devastating struggle up the Japanese mainland, or they could try to coerce the Japanese into surrendering now.
Surrender,
In July,
Japan.
The first
I
successful
know.
atomic
Oh,
bomb
God.
test took place
I
in New
would
Mexico,
surrender.
and the destructive weapon was ready for use. America and the UK were also seeing the Soviet Union not so much liberating as occupying its captured territory, and so they wanted to put on a show of force. On August 6th, the A-bomb fell on Hiroshima,
Oh,
Then,
I
on
remember
the 9th,
all about that.
Nagasaki.
It was.
The
And
cities
they
were
like
reduced to rubble,
melted to death.
and for the
Yeah, and I think to this day you can't go to that city.
Yeah, because the
Radiation.
chemicals, the radiation is still really, really bad and incredibly strong.
Yeah, those nuke things, those nuke bombs those are
I
scary.
wonder what it looks like now, though.
Me too. What do you think it looks like?
Probably exactly like that picture,
Yeah,
but
probably.
worse.
Yeah, probably looks pretty worse.
Because
If I could guess.
does anyone realistically step foot on there to pick up or to clean or anything?
I highly doubt it.
Because if there's no one living there, then what's the point?
True.
How
What is the
scary.
point? That is
I
extremely
understand
scary.
that we had to like give a warning, but that's
That's freaking crazy. This whole war thing is crazy. I hope we don't ever have another one. That whole war thing is freaking crazy, y'all. Okay, y'all just checking on the headphones, make sure everything sounds good. You know what I'm saying? Y'all can hear us? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Alright, we in this thing, we in this thing, we in this thing. We in this thing, y'all. But yeah. I can't imagine. Alright, let's get it.
people living there, it was a terrible fate. But for the Allies, it achieved their main aim. In September, the Emperor announced Japan's surrender,
Yeah.
saying the war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's
Yeah,
advantage.
it ain't
After
worth all
6
this.
years, war was finally over.
6
The Allies
years.
occupied
God.
Japan for 8 years. The
Shout out to this guy who made this video. He didn't turn a 30-minute video, 15 minutes both parts. This was 6 years worth of
6 years
information.
of events into
30
30
minutes.
minutes.
That's crazy.
Emperor was allowed to keep his position, but General MacArthur made sure this picture was printed in the Japanese press to display to the Japanese people that their emperor was not the divine, powerful being they had believed. Germany was divided between America, the
So
UK,
he did
France,
that
and the
picture on
Soviet
purpose.
Union. In
Thanks.
1949, the Allied sectors were united into West Germany. The Second World War had been more terrible and destructive than the first. In its aftermath, two major superpowers with two very different ideologies had come out victorious, and the tension between
Soviet
the two of them
Union.
would create a new kind of war. A very, very cold one.
The real deal Cold
Wow,
War,
Churchill,
right?
that looks just like me. And your app is doing really well.
Okay,
And this
okay.
quesadilla you made
Yeah,
is
plug in your app, dog. Plug in your app.
This quesadilla.
Yeah,
War
man.
is so scary.
It
and
is a
like,
strange
what is?
thing. And people always plug in World War III. I'm like, I don't
I
think
hope
nobody
not.
wants that to happen.
No.
80 million people overall. 80 million.
No.
That is crazy, y'all. 80 million? Yeah, no. Everybody mind your own business.
It's so sad. It's devastating
Yeah, they're like, just a couple of
for
like,
everyone.
yeah.
There's no winner.
Nobody won. 80 million people. That's crazy, man. Man, wow. Y'all gotta plug us in with some more history stuff. I see this channel got a lot of history stuff. And a lot of y'all was telling us like, hey, you need to check out this and this and that. So we're down to check that out, man.
Me
So
too.
comment down below. Top comment wins. Some history. We going down the pipe hole, man. It's your boy Tris.
And Gigi.
Peace.